Hey, ACC basketball coming up on the 8th, 4 o'clock, Pittsburgh at Clemson. Great basketball right here on WBBZ-TV. And speaking of college basketball, we have a guy who's been covering college basketball. I won't say how many years because that would date both of us, Bob. But Bob DiCesare from the Buffalo News, and I was kidding during the commercial break. Now we only get to talk about sports. We don't have any huge controversy. But let's talk about college hoops. I want to start with Syracuse because we've been carrying their games. They're in the ACC. They were undefeated, number one. Just 2 weeks ago, we had Jack Armstrong here talking about, how well they've played in the ACC. And Jack said they're not going to go undefeated. Well, heck, they sure. In the last 2 weeks, they've gone from first to seventh, and it's been a long spiraling stumble. What's happened with the Orange?
Well, a couple things, actually. I think the lack of depth has caught up with them a little bit. That season's a grind. There's no tougher conference, I don't think, to play in all the time than the ACC. That has caught up with them a little bit. And they run a little bit of a fine line. I mean, even when they were winning a lot, they weren't blowing teams out. I mean, they were blowing teams out when the talent discrepancy was great earlier in the season, but they weren't blowing teams out. And so it was a small margin of error. You look at the Virginia game the other day. I think Fair, Cooney, and Ennis combined to shoot 12 of 36 from the field. Well, 12 of 36 from the field means the other team's getting in transition. If the other team's getting in transition, they don't have to deal with the Syracuse zone, and then they're susceptible.
Right.
And that goes for any team. I mean, you have to shoot it reasonably well in order to set up that defense that causes so much trouble.
Well, they did have a couple unbelievable wins. The last-second shot against Pittsburgh, a 40-footer to win the game, and that's not always going to go your way. But, Bayham always seems, though, to manage to find a way to right the ship when it comes time for the NCAA tournament.
They're a very good team. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me they bounce back, and it wouldn't surprise me they win the national championship. I think they're talented enough for that. The question is, are they deep enough for that? What's the grind going to be if they get in foul trouble, especially in the backcourt? They have some serious issues. So we'll have to see how they handle that as it progresses.
All right, let's bring it closer to home. UB, Bobby Hurley now has the UB Bulls playing much better than they were in the beginning of the year. They actually lost to Niagara, in the first couple weeks of the season, which made me wonder, this team that was so experienced, that Reggie Witherspoon had kind of taken to this plateau, was Bobby Hurley going to go backwards? But now he seems to have gotten them playing his style of ball.
I agree entirely. I think they went through a transition period early in the year. It's certainly on defense, he was very demanding of them on the defensive end. He wasn't getting it through the first 10 games. I think he challenged the seniors in that regard. There was also the matter of the offense. There's much more freedom in this offense than there was before. Reggie Witherspoon ran a much more structured offense. There's freedom involved in this, and with freedom comes responsibility. So you have to be taking good shots. You have to be making sure that the ball's being worked around, getting the guys in the offense. There was a time when I was wondering I thought Javon McRae had taken a step backwards, but then boom, all of a sudden it all began to gel, probably about early January. And to tell you the truth, if they play their best, they're the best team in that conference. And they should win the NCAA berth. It's a tough thing going to Cleveland and winning. They'll probably end up playing Toledo at some point in that. Toledo's an hour away. They might end up playing Akron, which is close by, or Ohio, which is close by. They're going to need fan support, I think, if they're to go all the way. But they are, when they're playing well, I think the best team in that conference.
UB is, in my opinion, still a sleeping giant as far as fan base. We saw it a little bit in football when they had the bowl game up in Toronto. They got people to go up. But there's still a lot of people that aren't alumni of UB waiting for something to happen, and this could be the year.
It could well be the year, and I agree with you. I mean, it seems like people tend to say, well, they haven't been to the NCAAs,
right?
And that's the measuring stick, not realizing how difficult it is to get there out of that conference. Because of its Ohio base and one thing, and because there's some pretty good coaches and teams that have been there. Will that be the thing that pushes them over? Maybe. Has it been the thing that pushes them over in football with bowl appearances? I don't know. It's kind of mystifying to me, having grown up during the year of Calvin Murphy, the era of Calvin Murphy, Bob Lanier, guys like that.
Yeah, me too.
When I was small and going down to the games, and the colleges are now on the outskirts. I realize the Sabres have come along. I realize there's more games on television. But to me, those were some of my fondest days.
I was in a carriage. My dad brought me in a carriage to see those games. Canisius. A month ago, I would have said Canisius would have been my pick to make it to an NCAA berth. They were playing great. Billy Barron was leading that team. They've had some injuries. They've stumbled in the last 3 weeks.
They have. They're susceptible in some ways. I somewhat like their seeding for where they are moving forward. The tough thing to me is they're playing Siena in the first round. Siena's been playing very well. I think 9 of their last 10 games have been decided in the final minute, including the triple overtime game they had against Canisius and Albany. They're playing very well. It's a tough quarterfinal draw, but if they get through that, I like their matchup with Iona. I think they were two teams that play very similar styles. Iona's a little more aggressive in the front court, but that to me is a shooter's game. It comes down to who shoots the ball better, and I think it's better for them to avoid Manhattan or Quinnipiac until they get to the final, and then you can play on adrenaline because you have the NCAA.
And one would think, I mean, their ace in the hole, of course, is Billy Barron. He does have the ability to carry that team on his back through a short tournament.
He is, and that is the one thing. And Billy tweeted, I believe it was New Year's Day. I remember seeing a tweet from him. All I want in 1994 is an NCAA, or 2014,
yes.
Is an NCAA berth. And can he carry him? Yeah.
Shot. Quickly, Niagara. They're not going anywhere. But do you see anything a bright future at all for Casey and the Purple Eagles?
What's going to be interesting with them is does Antoine Mason stay for another year? He's done his 4-year term there now. He can leave. He can transfer out without and be able to play right away. So is he going to come back? I'm not sure he is. And that might not be a bad thing too for the rebuilding of this program under a new coach.
And St. Bonaventure, if it's tough for UB and Canisius to get coverage in this community right now with everything else going on, for Bonaventure, they've really, in my opinion, they're really on the outside looking in as far as on the radar for local basketball fans.
Maybe so in that they've been middling. Canisius has been a contender this year. UB has been a contender. Bona has not been, but he's done a very good job with that program. To me, it's really almost miraculous that in this day and age, with the game getting as big as it has, that he's been able to maintain, that Mark Schmidt's been able to maintain a competitive team down there every year. Obviously very good when he had Nicholson, and still very competitive. People didn't think thought they might just fall off the map, but he's a good coach. Him and his staff do a good job identifying, especially junior college players, and bringing them in and competitive all the time.
And it's still a very tough place to play. If you're
Absolutely.
A visiting team. Bob, thanks so much for being on the show, buddy.
Thank you, Bob.
Next time, hopefully we'll have a controversy to talk about next time we bring you back. Bob DiCesare will be back to wrap up all sports WNY right after this.